One of the distinguishing features of the Web API when compared to traditional MVC controllers is the fact that Web API does content negotiation. We talked about this topic a little earlier in the module, but I wanted to make it a little more concrete by building an application that used the Web API and asks for XML data. So the client I'm building is a console mode application. I created this just by going to the solution and saying, add new project, selecting a console mode application. And then another great feature of the Web API is the fact that you really don't need any specific toolset or framework to get information from the Web API. If you can make an HTTP request, you can get data from a Web API. But since we are in .NET and using C#, I'm going to use a Web API client that ships with the Web API that makes it very easy to make HTTP requests and process HTTP responses. This client, the HTTP client, is a part of the Web API. You can install it into any application by saying install package microsoft.aspnet.webapi.client. That'll add all the assemblies that you need. And I do want to point out, even though this HTTP client is part of Web API, it doesn't mean that it can only call into something that was built with the Web API. It's really a very generic library and API for making HTTP requests to anything and processing an HTTP response. So once that is installed, I can instantiate an HTTP client. I can say that that client should always add an accept header saying that we are requesting XML. And at that point, I can make a call to the server using get async or post async or put async. They're all async methods. That will send off a request to the server. I'm going to block the thread here and wait for the result. I can only get away with that because I'm in a console mode application and we can just force the user to wait for the result. That's not something you'd want to do if you're building a responsive UI. You'd want to await that result. But we're going to check to see if the result that came back had a status code indicating that the request was okay. If so, we'll take the content in that result and read it as a stream, load that into an X document, which is part of link to XML, create a namespace because the XML elements that are in there by default are created by the data contract serializer, and they'll be inside of a namespace that contains sort of the C# namespace that the particular model object is a part of. So we'll create that namespace, then issue a query looking for all the titles of the videos that are out there and writing them out. And so what does this look like when I run it? Let's just go to debug, start new instance. I can get back the two videos that are in the database. I can do that from a console application that has no references or dependencies on that video's web application. It's strictly making HTTP calls, requesting XML, parsing that XML, and displaying the results.